I mean, that sounds like a Lifetime movie. And honestly, I'm kind of here for it. I want something fun to read, so. And honestly, I'm kind of here for it. Hi, Jenny here. And as you saw in the previous clip, I read this book for the holiday season in 2022, Christmas Under a Cranberry Sky by Holly Martin. It was not what I expected it to be. I like reading romance books, and during the holidays I watched many Hallmark Christmas movies and I enjoyed them. I didn't like it because it's a romance book. I feel like a lot of people assume that if you don't like a romance book, it's because you don't like romance. That's not it. I just felt like this book had some issues that could have been easily resolved with a little bit further editing. And I wanted to talk about those and kind of go through the plot and my opinion on it. Again, this is not a hate video against Holly Martin. I just wanted to talk about this book and kind of rant about it. When I finished this book and while I was reading it, I was really, really annoyed by this book. But now it's been a few weeks and I'm more chill. I'm calm. I'm collected. I don't think I would have talked about this book, but the back cover says, if you love Jenny Colgan and Carol Matthews, then this deliciously heartwarming novel is the perfect festive treat for you. I've read one book by Carol Matthews, but I've read several by Jenny Colgan. So I think that kind of allows me to talk about this book and why I don't think it's fair to compare Holly Martin to Jenny Colgan. In this video, I will go through the plot, my issues with it, and how I would like to resolve them. Again, this is not hate against Holly Martin. She has released many books, something that I only dream of, so she obviously has an audience who loves her writing. And in addition, this was released in 2016, so most likely her writing has improved by now. Let's talk about this book. So it starts with Piper Chesterfield. Everyone calls her Pip. I don't like that name, so I'll call her Piper. She is a travel writer, a hotel reviewer, who has been living off of her suitcase for several years, and now she is going to go to her last hotel that she's going to review and then take a 6-month sabbatical from work. Now, the last hotel is Stardust Lake Hotel, and it's a dreamy winter wonderland on an island in Scotland, but it's run by Gabe Whittaker. Now, who is Gabe Whittaker? He is a CEO of several hotels. He is a single father to his daughter Wren, and he is Piper's ex-boyfriend / childhood best friend / soulmate, etc. So this is the setup, the starting point. And obviously when they meet again for the first time after 12 years, so the last time they saw each other, they were 17 and 18, I think. It's a bit awkward, their first meeting. And Piper, first off, says that this is a conflict of interest. I can't do this review, but her employer, the magazine, what was the Tree of Life or something like that, it's like, it's not a conflict of interest, just write it. So that's that. So when Gabe asks what she's doing there, she says that she's a travel photographer because she doesn't tell anyone that she's the reviewer when she visits a hotel, and think this is kind of a similar case as well. The starting point is that Wren, Gabe's daughter, a small child, has wandered out alone, and Piper finds her alone, and she tries to look for her parents, and then she sees Gabe. Then in chapter 3, there's the whole background story of Piper and then Gabe and why they fell apart. It is exactly 5 pages long. 5 pages. And what is the backstory? It's quite out there. It's quite big and quite huge. So basically, Piper and Gabe were together as teenagers and they made love for the first time, right? Then Piper, who was adopted, but her adoptive mother has passed away when she was a young child. When she was left with her adoptive father alone, he did not really want to have a child on his own, and because of his grief of losing his wife, he turned to alcohol for remedy. Piper has been adopted, but she's very close to the Whittaker family, who have 3 children, including Gabe, and they really love Piper and so on. So 12 years ago, Piper and Gabe are together. They make love for the first time, and then the next day, Piper's adoptive father finds out that they made love, and he takes her and her belongings, throws her in the car and says, "I don't want to have a slut in my house." She's 17. You will go live with your aunt in London. Well, Piper is like, well, why can't I go to the Whittakers? And he says, I don't know if he's hungover or drunk or whatever. He says that he offered £5,000 for them to take Piper, but they refused. So he's speeding, driving and telling her that she's a slut and he doesn't love her and so on. And then they crash into a lake and they get stuck under the ice, and the father dies there. He had a heart attack. She survives somehow. She gets herself out of there. She walks over to Whittakers, who I guess lived close by where the accident happened, and she sees Gabe kissing another girl. So she is in an emotional, horrible state of mind, and she just leaves. She goes to her aunt's in London, and they never see each other again until this point 12 years later. This was all told in 5 pages. I feel like the story would have benefited if it was told, this horrible event was told in like fragments and alongside while the story was happening, rather than just in one chapter in 5 pages. Because that's quite like an intense event in the main character's life that shouldn't be just told in one chapter in 5 pages. So then they get acquainted. The electricity at Piper's cottage, at the Stardust Hotel Resort, does not work. So she miraculously has to stay at Gabe's residence. Right. So a little bit of an awkward interaction and so on. Gabe and Piper talk about what happened 12 years ago. And then for Gabe, he had not actually been making out with another girl, which is how Piper saw it. He was actually just comforting a friend who also had lost her dad the same day. But obviously Piper didn't see it that way because of her emotional state. Isn't that convenient that another girl's dad also dies on the same day? Like, I don't know. Yeah, so that's the explanation for the cheating, feeling like, for Piper feeling like she was cheated on. And this is, that's it. She basically apologizes for misunderstanding and for not reaching out after and for not being clear and ghost, like all that. But it's really brief. It's like few pages. And while Gabe's siblings work at the hotel also, they are kind of like remind her like, yeah, what happened back then really fucked up Gabe, so please do not hurt him again. But that's kind of it for their discussions regarding that situation, which I think is not enough. I feel like the author should have really delved into like, okay, how does something that happened when they were teenagers, how is still impacting them 12 years later? Surely there's a little bit of like, okay, Piper has nightmares. Okay, Gabe has trust issues. But they're not delve into it too much. And I'm not talking that you have to be a psychologically analytic here. Just give it more time, give it more attention. Not too much if you don't want to, but like some, please. I feel like child characters in romance books and movies, they're not really well developed ever. And the same thing is here. Ren is in love with Frozen. Everything is about Frozen to her. And I just feel like that's a like, okay, what do kids like? Oh, kids like Frozen. That's it. It's a bit lazy in my opinion, but you know. And then the other thing thing that kind of defines Ren the child is her wanting her dad to have a partner. And are little kids that like invested in their parents' love life? I don't know. I just feel like, is that realistic? I don't know. Does it have to be? But like, I just wish this kid was given more of a personality than just frozen and being invested in her dad's love life. One of my main issues with the book was the pacing. In the beginning, in one chapter, Gabe is like, I want nothing to do with Piper. I will treat her as like a regular guest. She's nothing to me. Then in the following chapter, he is happy to have his best friend back. And then in the subsequent chapter after that, Gabe is like, oh, I'm falling in love with her again. This is within few hours, by the way. This is within a day. And there's this many emotions. Like, I just feel like there should have been slower development in the characters' feelings and not just like, okay, everything's perfect now, basically. And I just feel like this whole 12 years Piper had thought that Gabe had cheated on her. I just feel like that's a huge conflict and it should have been treated further. One of the reasons why it felt so out of place and kind of like not enjoyable to read because the author did not take time to delve into these conflict moments in the story. Gabe and Piper start to hang out, spend time together, and Gabe tells Piper a lot about the hotel. He owns several hotels and he is taking his time with this one because it's his grandpa's old hotel, so he wants to give it a grand reopening. So there is a lot of talk of Gabe telling Piper about the hotel, how they help locals with it, and just everything. It's interesting, but it also feels very much like a, look, I am a nice CEO, I am a nice millionaire, I am involved, I am a lovely employer, which, okay, if that's what you want to go with. And while they spend time together and kind of get reacquainted and hang out, the whole time the author is repeatedly writes, she is falling in love with him again, or he is falling in love with her again. Once or twice is fine, but the fact that it's repeated several times here, it just kind of states the obvious and makes the reader feel like, yeah, I get it. Do you have to repeat it all the time? It felt very much like word filling, and I just felt like it was so unnecessary to write it so many times there, because the reader gets it. The reader knows that they are reading a romance book. They don't need to be told that they are falling in love with each other again, because they can read through their actions. So as I mentioned, the siblings of Gabe work at the hotel. There's the older half brother, whose name I do not remember, and then Neve, Gabe's sister. We get Neve a little bit more because the subsequent part to this story is focused on Neve. And Neve's two personality traits that are represented is being protective of Gabe and being a good worker. Now then there's that part where they talk about her relationship and how she recently broke up with her boyfriend because of reasons. That's really all we get from Neve. Apparently Piper and Neve had a really close relationship growing up, so Neve also felt like she was betrayed by Piper when she just disappeared. And they do have some kind of like arguments between Neve and Piper, which I thought were an interesting addition, and it showed that what happened 12 years ago, it just wasn't easily resolved. Oh, that was a misunderstanding thing. Like, it actually impacted these characters. But I wish that would have been shown more between Gabe and Piper rather than just Neve and Piper. And then Gabe's half older brother, whose name I do not remember. His backstory is told in like 2 pages, when Piper and he never got along growing up, and he also kind of has an attitude towards her now that she's back. And then Piper's like, what's wrong with, like, what have I done wrong? And then the brother explains that he didn't feel like he belonged in the family because he had a different mother and so on. But not very memorable since I do not remember his name. So I felt like the side characters in this book weren't really strong and just were there for the sake of the couple, which, you know, you don't always have to have a great cast of characters, I suppose. Piper's real dream was to be a travel photographer. And Gabe and Piper go through Piper's photos, and Gabe is so amazed by her talent, and he even wants to purchase some of her work, and like he is so amazed by Piper. And Piper is like, no, what? I'm just taking these for myself. These are nothing special. But Gabe sees that they are special. Now that's a really sweet thing. But the delivery of this scene was not the greatest. And like this plotline, this storyline in the plot was not the greatest because, again, I feel like the writer here would have needed more editing because they had added here, Gabe says, you really need to think about selling this. I would buy these off you in a heartbeat and put them in my hotels. I'd hang them in each room. The guests would love them. She, Piper, clicked on the next photo, ignoring him. She had no idea how much talent she had. The reader can tell that. The reader can tell after reading their dialogue and how she reacted to Gabe's praise. They can tell that Piper was uncomfortable with it and didn't realize how talented she was. The reader does not need to be told that separately. So I feel like if this text had been edited a bit better, maybe it would have been more enjoyable. So then the story gets to the big romantic evening between Piper and Gabe, who have now been talking a little bit like, well, I want to be with you again, but I understand that we have this difficult past. It doesn't happen just like that. I'm falling in love back with you. Trust me, it's not as deeply represented as I'm describing now, but that's kind of the vibe here. So now they have this big romantic evening where they discuss where they want to go. Big romantic evening. Let me emphasize that the writer can go all the way as romantic as she wants to. And what does she do? They recreate the date they had the night they made love for the first time. They have pizza and ice cream. And then they dance to Ed Sheeran's Photograph. Don't get me wrong, that's a nice song, but like, you have this big romantic moment. And yes, a reference to your teenage years, that's really sweet. But like, you had the chance to do something incredibly romantic that's not realistic at all, just over the top everything, and you go with pizza and ice cream. Okay, it was a disappointing moment. It wasn't the romance that I wanted from the book. And then they make love again, and oh my god, everything is perfect. And it's been a few days, but everything is perfect, I suppose. No need to discuss past trauma or anything. Then, closer to the end of the book, Ren runs out alone to the lake, frozen lake, but the ice is not thick enough to hold a human. So the ice breaks under her. And Piper finds Ren and then goes out to help her. This obviously triggered some trauma for Piper for obvious reasons. But she manages to save Ren and everything's great. But then, right after a few hours, it was either a few hours or a day after, they find out after the grand reopening. I think it was after the grand reopening. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but as they are doing the grand reopening, they have reporters and reviewers coming to the hotel. And they are especially nervous about one reviewer called Mr. Black. And they have decided that they will recognize who Mr. Black is by having certain dishes in the menu that they know Mr. Black will order. Piper doesn't know who Mr. Black is. They're all really nervous. Then Piper orders what Mr. Black usually has. When Neve tries to get a hold of Piper's employer as a photographer and they can't find any information, they come to the conclusion that Piper is Mr. Black, the reviewer. And this conflict was presented in the beginning, that Piper lies about being a photographer when she is actually a reviewer. I do feel like she could have told Gabe earlier that, hey, this is a situation here. But by the few last chapters, we get the huge reveal and the moment of conflict, and it was resolved in a few pages. I just feel like, because Gabe obviously has trust issues, and so does Piper from the situation from 12 years ago, I felt like it deserved way more time than few pages, and like, oh, okay, I get it. So Gabe and Piper fight, and then they separate from each other for a moment. Then when they get back together, Piper is unpacking her things because she has decided that she will stay with Gabe and Ren at the hotel at the island in Scotland. But Gabe understands it as Piper packing her bags and running away. And he's like, okay, here you are, running away again. But then they resolve it by saying that, yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't tell you that I was the reviewer. I usually don't tell anyone I'm a reviewer. I didn't know I was Mr. Black. But I am here. I want to be committed, and you have to trust me that this is what I want. And done. That's the big conflict resolved in few pages. And then this book ends, because it's the first part of a series. I don't know if it's a trilogy or what. The book ends before Christmas even happens. It ends on Christmas Eve with Neve's ex-boyfriend coming to the island. That's the setup for the next book. Now, I just feel like if they had moved up the reveal that Piper is the reviewer, they should have moved it up to maybe like middle part of the book. So they would have had more time to kind of discuss and talk about like, okay, you lied to me. This is how it makes me feel. We need to see how this impacts our dynamic now. I just feel like it deserved, again, more time. More time to be discussed and more time to be delved into more. I feel like if it had been earlier, if the conflict had been earlier before their big romantic date where they officially got together again, if it had been before that, then the romantic evening and them deciding to be together again, I feel like it would have been more rewarding and more satisfying as a reader. Back cover compares Holly Martin to Jenny Colgan. I just don't think it's fair to compare authors, period. But I just feel like, because I've read Jenny Colgan a lot, as you can see, and Jenny Colgan, yes, I think the only similarities is that the main character is a woman and there's romance. Oftentimes Jenny Colgan's books take place in Scotland, and that was also the location here. But other than that, I just feel like with Jenny Colgan's books, how I view is that they have the main character. The main character is going through something. They go through it, they make changes, they go through. They are a fully fledged character on their own, and the romance just naturally happens. I felt like here we have a character, but we don't get to know them, the main character, that deeply, because we only get to know them through the romance that they then have. So I felt like that's why the comparison doesn't really fit, just because they're women who write romantic novels. Yeah, the romance feels so much more natural in Jenny Colgan's books than here, because it's not so obviously stated every time, like she's falling in love with him, he's falling in love with her. The reader is given more space to connect the dots. Do I have something good to say about the book? I really tried to think of it, and I think Neve's character was interesting and there was a lot of potential there. I liked how her work ethic was represented in the book, but that's it really. They didn't really delve into her that deeply. She was there to just support the main characters. And then obviously the setup in the end was that her ex-boyfriend comes to the island. But I don't think Neve was that well represented enough that I would be interested to read a whole book about the character. And at least the book wasn't offensive. So there's that, I suppose. So I feel like those were my main issues with the book. I feel like it should have been edited down way more. I feel like some plots deserve to be delved into more and discussed further. They should have shifted some of the events around, and I feel like it could have been way better. It's so funny. I was so annoyed and frustrated while reading this and after finishing it, but now I feel like I'm really calm. After I finished the book, I was so happy that I was done with it. I read the acknowledgements and it says, to the wonderful Kakslautanen resort in Finland, the real life Stardust Lake Hotel. It just got personal. So this whole time, this book, the setup of the Scottish Island, it was based on a hotel in Finland, my home country. So you're telling me that I read a story based on a place in Finland and it was bad? That's it, really. I hope my thoughts made sense and my review made sense. This is not attack on Holly Martin. It was a review of her text. Again, this was released in 2016. Hopefully her writing has improved and that she has a better editor now. She has published many books, so which is something that I only dream of. So my words don't really matter. So, alright. Thank you so much for watching this ranty video. Bye.